Hi, this is Bill McEwen, News Director and columnist for GVWire.com. The GOP consultant Mike Madrid joins us today. Mike's an expert in Latino voting patterns who has long urged Republicans to reach out more to Latino voters. Mike also was the California Republican Party's political director in the 1990s, but for the 2018 elections, he's doing something different. Mike Madrid is advising the campaign of Antonio Villaraigosa, a Democratic candidate for governor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Bill, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I know it's a very busy time of year right now, and you're looking at all the polls. Vote by mail is well underway. It's just basically 12 days to go to the actual election. Where does your candidate stand right now?
Well, that's really two different questions. The polling, as you've probably seen, the public polling has been all over the place. We obviously, like all campaigns, are handling our own internals, and it shows us neck and neck for second place with one of the Republican candidates, and I expect when all the votes are counted that we will be in the runoff for November with Gavin Newsom, who's been leading most of the public polls for the better part of the entire campaign cycle.
So I've been looking at some of the polling as well, and it shows that about 15% of Latinos have returned their mail-in ballots. What do you think the Latino turnout will be for this primary election?
Well, the good news is that 15% is actually overperforming where Latino voters traditionally have been over the past 10 election cycles or so. We're about 3 points above where Latinos were in the last gubernatorial election at this point in the race. The curious thing, Bill, though, about Latino voters is that they are overwhelmingly day of voters. There might be something about our community where we like to actually see each other and talk to each other about civic engagement or politics, but showing up at the voting booth is something that Latinos have historically had a stronger proclivity to do than vote by mail. We expect, if all the national trends over the last 2 years hold since November of 2016, that Latinos will show up in very significant numbers. We've been setting record turnout numbers for the past 2 years nationally. Because there are more Latinos in California than any other state, we expect that surge will continue, and we think that Latinos will probably be at or above the 20% of all voter threshold, which would be a record for a gubernatorial cycle, and we think that would bode very, very well for Antonio Villaraigosa's campaign.
Mike, the polls also show that Villaraigosa is struggling a bit to win over older and college-educated voters. You and I both know these are high-propensity voters that often decide elections. Is there anything you can do in the last 12 days in that regard?
There certainly is, and most of this, of course, is predicated not just on the last 12 days, but what we've been working on for the past 18 months or so. You point out quite correctly that it's older and college-educated voters that are have the highest likelihood, or as you correctly stated, propensity to vote. This campaign is really focused like a laser beam on economic issues and job issues, and particularly those in California who have been left behind. So a lot of politicians talking in Sacramento about this California comeback and talking about great unemployment numbers and how well our gross domestic product has been over the past few months. Well, the reality is, and you and I both know this, Bill, a lot of people, especially in the Central Valley, but in the other parts of the state as well, have not felt that economic recovery, and they do not meet the demographic that you just mentioned. Not just Latinos, not just young people, not just women, not just all minorities, but increasingly a lot of folks who are just out there working for a living, trying to make ends meet, struggling to make live paycheck to paycheck, have been really, I think, energized by this campaign. And while older college-educated voters do tend to dominate the electoral system, we believe, and I think the polls are showing, that people who do not feel a part of the system and do feel left out do show up. We do very well, and we expect that that's going to happen over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Mike, the campaign has spent many, many days in the Central Valley. What's your assessment of that? Is it paying off for you? And if you had to do it all over again, would you do it the same way?
That's a really great question. A lot of people were telling us to ignore the Central Valley because the truth is there's just not that many votes in the Central Valley, but our campaign has never approached it that way. The Central Valley is really central to what this message and campaign thematic is about because if the next governor doesn't work for the Central Valley, it really isn't working for California. We can no longer afford, Bill, to be a state that is leaving very wide segments of our population so far behind. California is home to the greatest poverty rates in the nation, the largest income inequality disparities in the country, and it's no secret that a lot of those challenges economically are in the Central Valley. We decided to make this a central component of our efforts, a central part of our campaign. So while those votes may not dominate the statewide, electoral map, we're very convinced that the coalition of having the Central Valley arm in arm with what we're trying to do is going to be not just good politics, but good governance. And it's why Antonio's been there over 55 times now. Most people do 2 or 3 stops in the Valley. We've been there over 50 times. By far the largest number of endorsements in the Central Valley. Just got Alan Autry, former mayor of Fresno, coming out last week on TV Wire. We're feeling a lot of momentum moving in the Valley, and we would not do it any differently. We think it's central. We think it's important. And like I said, it's not just good politics at the end of the day. It's good policy and it's good governance, and it's the responsible thing to do that perhaps too many governors in the past have not done.
So, Mike, the path to victory for Villaraigosa includes winning over Republicans. Are you surprised even a little bit by the fact that Republican John Cox has emerged as a bona fide candidate?
Well, we're not surprised. In fact, this has always been the biggest challenge, not John Cox per se. We actually think Travis Allen is a more formidable candidate. If he's able to get his message out, I think his message is a lot more consistent with some of the more conservative voters in the state. But having said that, look, Antonio's the whole roadmap for Antonio is just getting 10-15% of Republicans will be enough to push us through the primary. We have every confidence that by working in the Central Valley and in working in the Inland Empire, Orange County, and some of the more conservative parts of the state, 10% is very doable. In fact, we expect we'll probably surpass that number. So the challenge has always been whether or not somebody with our profile can get through a primary with a candidate to our far left, and at least one Republican running, Travis Allen running to the more conservative wing of the base of the party. If we can corral just 10-15% of the votes and put that together in coalition with our base, we feel like we're well positioned to move forward.
So last Friday when President Trump came out and endorsed Cox, was that a surprise to you? Were you expecting it? And could you explain some other factors that might be involved as they pertain to the competitive House races in California?
Yeah, we were not surprised. We had actually been anticipating it since the Republican convention about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Kevin McCarthy, obviously from the Central Valley and a good friend of mine, is doing everything he can to have Republicans hold on to the House of Representatives, as you know. A couple nights before the Trump announcement, he had dinner with the president. And I think Kevin McCarthy rightfully is doing his job to protect the House. The unfortunate part is, while that may boost turnout in those 7 Democratic congressional districts in Orange County and in San Diego County, there's nobody who believes that a Republican is going to win the governor's office. In fact, most Republicans, myself included, who spent their whole life in the Republican Party, just understand the reality that that's not going to happen in California. And so while it might be a good move for hopefully Speaker Kevin McCarthy, it's not really good for the rest of those Republicans, especially those in the Valley, who have to live with a governor who's going to be making extraordinarily significant decisions on things like water conveyance and decisions that affect the business community. And so, look, there's a reason why we spent so much time in the Valley. And while I respect Kevin's decision to push the president in that direction, we live in California. We don't live in Washington, D.C. We're going to have to live with the next governor. And the only electable choice alternative to Gavin Newsom is Antonio Villaraigosa, because we all know that Republicans just not going to win the state.
So, Mike, you recently shared an interesting statistic with my good friend Dan Moraine of Cal Matters, and the stat is this: out of 2.6 million Californians who have registered to vote since Trump's election in 2016, just 3.1% were Latinos registering as Republicans. What's the implication of that stat?
Well, that's one of the more startling statistics I've looked at, and as somebody who looks at political statistics all day long and now for the past 30 years, it's rare to come across a data point that kind of makes your jaw drop a little bit. But this one did. And let me reiterate it because it's significant. 2.6 million Californians have registered to vote since Donald Trump was sworn in as president. Of those 2.6 million, 3.1% are Latino Republicans. And Latinos are the fastest growing demographic in California. Republicans are the fastest shrinking demographic. There's less than 23%, about 23% of all the voters in the state are Republican. At current pace, the Republican Party is going to really slide into this deep irrelevancy, in large part because of the alienation of the Latino community. And as you mentioned in my introduction, I spent my entire career working with Republicans and the Republican Party to do better outreach to the Republicans, to Republicans to do outreach to the Latino community. I think it's mildly ironic that a community that shares so much in common with between Latinos and Republicans on economic issues, on bread and butter issues, on education issues, is having such a difficult time finding compatibility. But the tone and tenor of what our politicians say matters, and the language that is being used by Travis Allen and John Cox has really, I think, forced Latinos to reconsider their affiliation with the Republican Party, but also really driven away younger Latinos who are registering at a very fast clip away from even considering the Republican brand. And while it's heartbreaking, the reality is there, and it's not a good prognosis in the short, medium, or long term for the Republican Party I've worked in for 25 years.
So, Mike, last question for you, and it's pretty simple, right up your wheelhouse. If Antonio Villaraigosa makes the runoff, how do you see the dynamics changing for the general election?
Well, I think most observers would agree it's pretty clear and it's pretty easy that the pathway for victory in November for Mr. Villaraigosa opens up considerably. I think there's a much bigger pathway towards victory for somebody with Mr. Villaraigosa's profile. So, look, it's always a challenge when there's 6 candidates to kind of run as the reasonable person who's able to govern and bring both sides of the debates together. We live in an extraordinary time where people would rather, play to the extremes, either supporting very far-right Republicans or very far-left Democrats. Those are really the two profiles we're running against. What we're saying is that everybody's got a place in California, and we think in a one-on-one matchup against Gavin Newsom, Antonio Villaraigosa wins that race pretty considerably. So very confident about prospects going into November. The challenge will be pulling together our coalition in June, but with 12 days out, we think we're well positioned with the polls and with our voter base, and we're expecting to do well a week from Tuesday in June.
Mike, would you agree with this assessment as we head towards June 5th? Not only is Gavin Newsom trying to come in first place, but he's also trying to pick the person he will face in November. I say that based on his recent advertising strategies.
Yeah, let me spend a little time on that. It's a great question, Bill. There's a reason why Gavin Newsom is spending money to promote the candidacy of John Cox, and the answer is really simple. He wants to run against him because he knows with almost 100% certainty that he's going to beat him. So anybody in politics would love to pick their candidates. What you got to ask yourself is why. And the reason why is because if he can spend millions of dollars promoting his candidacy, he knows he's going to win. In fact, Gavin Newsom has spent more money on television advertisements, and I think even in the mail now, promoting John Cox because he knows he's going to win. That's the only reason a campaign does that. He's also going negative on us because he also knows that if we do win in June, then we're going to beat him in November. So it's actually, I think, a pretty smart tactic, but probably a little bit too cute by half, and I think the voters are smart enough to see it. And I think those that were considering Cox recognize there's a reason why Gavin Newsom wants to run against us, and that a vote for John Cox is really a vote for Gavin Newsom.
Mike, you've been very generous with your time, and we appreciate your insights into this race And hopefully we can get back together and break down the results after June 5th.
You know, Bill, I appreciate you having me. As somebody who's in Sacramento a lot, I'm really excited about what you're doing with GV Wire. And I got to say, it's built a real big audience up here amongst opinion makers in Sacramento. So whatever magic sauce you've got there with GV Wire, love what you're doing. Love to help out. Can always make the time for you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it too. Thank you, Mike.